There are some figures in history who seem larger than life. George Washington, Napoleon Bonaparte, and Abraham Lincoln come to mind. But even giants have humble beginnings. And the story of two such giants is the subject of this episode. A general who took down an empire and then almost destroyed a country, and a general who turned his back on his country but became beloved. Hi everyone, welcome to the series. Today we will look at the lives of Ulysses S. Grant and Robert E. Lee. This is part of our series where we try and understand great historical figures by looking at their lives through the lens of Joseph Campbell's classic work, The Hero with a Thousand Faces, also known as A Hero's Journey. If you are new here, join us after this intro for what promises to be an exciting adventure. If you're a returning viewer, welcome back. Sit tight because today we're going to have ourselves a time. Let's get started. To truly appreciate the hero's journey that was Ulysses S. Grant, we must first meet him as an ordinary young man. Born in 1822, his father expected him to follow in his footsteps into politics. So it was with much disappointment that he learned that his son had decided to enroll in West Point instead. Perhaps his father's influence was too strong. But the young Grant was a stubborn sort, and he would not budge from his decision. He graduated from West Point in 1843 and was commissioned a second lieutenant in the 4th Infantry Regiment. Like many young men of the time, he was itching for action and soon got his wish when he fought with distinction against the Mexican Army during the Mexican-American War. After the war, however, he became disillusioned with military life and resigned his commission to take up a life in the leather goods business. But it wasn't long before he realized that civilian life wasn't for him either. He married the love of his life, Julia Dent. Together, they settled in St. Louis and raised a family while he tried his hand in business. But even though he was happy in his personal life, he was becoming increasingly disturbed by the social issue that threatened to tear the country apart. When the issue of slavery flared up yet again, he made a choice that led him onto the path of greatness. When the American Civil War began in 1861, Grant rejoined the Union Army. Grant was soon found himself swept up in the cause and led the Union forces to victory at Fort Donelson in 1862. This victory established him as a national hero, and he went on to defeat the Confederacy at Vicksburg, securing the Mississippi River for the Union. His skill as a general and his determination to see the war through to its end were instrumental in the Union's victory. As Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered to him at Appomattox Courthouse in 1865, ending the Civil War. Grant was a war hero. The first stage of our hero's journey is the call to adventure. For Grant, the adventure began with his call to lead the Union Army. While facing conflict between the North and the South, Grant was torn between his desire to help the Union and his obligations to his family. This inner turmoil reflects the universal human experience of wrestling with difficult decisions and the potential consequences that come with them. Ultimately, Grant chose to answer the call and lead the Union Army. This decision marked a turning point in his life and set him on a path that would lead to greatness. After the Civil War, Grant was a national hero, but he was called to a different kind of adventure. When he was elected the 18th President of the United States in 1868, his presidency was marked by both triumphs and challenges, including the passage of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution, which abolished slavery and granted citizenship and voting rights to African Americans. However, his administration was also plagued by scandal, including the Mobilier scandal involving members of his own party. These scandals damaged the reputation of his presidency and left a lasting impact on his legacy. Nevertheless, Grant's accomplishments during his presidency were significant. He is remembered for his commitment to civil rights and his efforts to rebuild the nation after the Civil War. Despite the challenges he faced, Grant remained steadfast in his commitment to justice and equality for all Americans. In the face of adversity, he demonstrated courage, integrity, and a willingness to fight for what he believed in. In doing so, he left an enduring legacy as a champion of civil rights and a leader who helped to shape the course of American history. As the hero moves into the next phase of his journey, we can see the effects of the ordeal that he has been through. Often this change of pace allows the hero to be tested in a different way than before. During his adventures, in Grant's case, he was no stranger to making tough decisions. As a general, he had to weigh the risks and benefits of each move he made, knowing that lives were at stake. But now, as president, his decisions carried even more weight. He had to consider not just the lives of soldiers, but the lives of all Americans. The stakes were higher than ever before, and the pressure was intense. Yet he did not shy away from the challenge. He tackled each decision with the same determination and resolve that had won him victories on the battlefield. He listened to his advisors, weighed the options, and made the best decision he could for the good of the country. In addition to the increased stakes and pressure, Grant's role as president also came with a new set of responsibilities. He had to manage a large and complex government, deal with foreign policy issues, and represent the United States on the world stage. All the while, he had to stay true to his principles and fight for what he believed in despite the opposition he faced. As he navigated these challenges, Grant demonstrated the qualities that had made him a successful general: his courage, integrity, and determination. He never lost sight of his goals, and he never gave up in the face of adversity. He tackled each challenge with the same determination and resolve that had won him victories on the battlefield. Grant's journey as a president was not without its challenges. He faced opposition from those who did not agree with his policies, as well as from those who sought to undermine his authority. But he persevered, working tirelessly to achieve his goals and make a positive impact on the country he loved. Throughout his presidency, Grant continued to demonstrate the qualities that had made him a successful general: courage, integrity, and determination. He faced each challenge with the same determination and resolve that had won him victories on the battlefield. In doing so, he left an enduring legacy as a champion of civil rights and a leader who helped to shape the course of American history. In the midst of these challenges, Grant found support from those who believed in him and his vision for the country. His wife Julia was a constant source of strength and stability, and he had the backing of a loyal group of friends and political allies. Together, they helped him navigate the treacherous waters of politics and stay true to his principles. Despite the opposition he faced, Grant never lost sight of his goals. He worked tirelessly to achieve his objectives and make a positive impact on the country he loved. It was during this time that Grant began to face opposition from those who did not agree with his policies, as well as from those who sought to undermine his authority. However, he continued to work tirelessly to achieve his goals and make a positive impact on the country he loved. One of the most significant challenges Grant faced during his presidency was the opposition he encountered from members of his own party. Some members of his own party opposed his efforts to grant civil rights to African Americans, seeing it as a threat to the balance of power in the South. Additionally, there were members of his party who opposed his policies on economic and financial matters. Despite this opposition, Grant remained steadfast in his commitment to his principles and continued to work towards his goals. Another challenge Grant faced was the assassination of his predecessor, Abraham Lincoln, which had a profound impact on him personally and politically. Lincoln had been a mentor and friend to Grant, and his death left a void in Grant's life and in the country's leadership. Nonetheless, Grant persevered, working to honor Lincoln's legacy and continue his work of healing the wounds of the nation. Despite the challenges he faced, Grant continued to work tirelessly to achieve his goals and make a positive impact on the country he loved. He worked to protect the rights of African Americans, promote economic growth and stability, and maintain peace and order at home and abroad. Despite the opposition he faced, Grant never lost sight of his goals. He remained steadfast in his commitment to his principles and continued to work towards a better future for the country he loved. In the end, Grant's presidency was a time of both triumph and tragedy. He accomplished much despite the opposition he faced and the challenges he overcame. His legacy continues to be debated and discussed by historians, but there is no doubt that he was a man who rose to the occasion and served his country with honor and integrity. But our hero's journey does not end at the peak of his career. Now we must watch him struggle with his greatest challenge yet, his own mortality. Towards the end of his life, Grant was diagnosed with throat cancer and began to lose his voice. As the disease progressed, he became increasingly isolated and withdrawn. Unable to speak, he turned to writing to communicate with his wife and close friends. During this difficult time, he reflected on his life and career, and his thoughts turned to the legacy he would leave behind. Determined to go out with a bang, he wrote his memoirs, which became one of the best-selling books of the late 19th century. But his health continued to decline, and in July of 1885, he died. It seemed as if the hero had fallen, but, like all heroes, his spirit lived on. Ulysses S. Grant was one of the most controversial leaders in American history. What do you think? How do you think he handled his presidency? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Now we shift our focus to Robert E. Lee, Grant's primary foe during the Civil War. Robert E. Lee is one of the most recognizable figures in American history. He's been portrayed as everything from a dashing hero to a sinister villain. But who was he really? Robert Edward Lee was born on January 19, 1807, at Stratford Hall in Westmoreland County, Virginia. His father, Light Horse Harry Lee, had been a cavalry officer in the American Revolutionary War and later served as a congressman and governor of Virginia. His mother, Ann Carter Lee, was the daughter of a wealthy planter and member of a prominent Virginia family. From his earliest days, Robert was a bright and promising student, excelling in his studies and showing an aptitude for languages. He was also an accomplished athlete, known for his skill in riding and boxing. However, despite his many talents, Lee was not particularly ambitious and was content to live a quiet life as a gentleman farmer. This would change, however, when his father fell into debt and was forced to send him to West Point. At West Point, Lee quickly distinguished himself as a brilliant and dedicated student, graduating second in his class of 29 cadets in 1829. He then served in the U.S. Army for several years, mostly at frontier posts in Texas and the Midwest. During this time, he met and married Mary Anna Custis, the daughter of a wealthy Virginia planter and great-granddaughter of Martha Washington. The couple settled down on a large estate near Richmond, Virginia, where they raised their children and enjoyed a comfortable life. In addition to his domestic duties, Lee also served as an instructor at Virginia Military Institute, which gave him the opportunity to put his teaching skills to use while still living at home. Despite his happy family life, Lee's career in the Army did not progress as quickly as he had hoped, in part because he was seen as too aristocratic and aloof by his peers and superiors. This was a source of frustration for Lee, who believed that he had been passed over for promotions due to his family's social status. So when the Mexican-American War broke out in 1846, he saw it as a chance to prove himself. Lee's performance during the war was outstanding. He led his troops with courage and skill, winning several important victories. This is when he first met Grant. In particular, Lee's command at Chapultepec on September 13, 1847, was a brilliant tactical achievement. As a result of his success, Lee was promoted to the rank of colonel, although after the war, this was removed. This would have a profound impact on Lee's life. Although it made him a hero in America, the war caused him to grow closer to Mexico, which was seen as a threat to American interests. Upon returning to the United States, Lee's reputation as a national hero preceded him, and he was greeted with parades and celebrations wherever he went. His close friend, General Winfield Scott, urged him to run for public office, believing that Lee would make an excellent president. However, Lee was not interested in politics and declined Scott's offer. Instead, he returned to his life as a soldier, serving in various command positions across the country. Throughout this time, Lee remained on good terms with the federal government. Even after the outbreak of the Civil War in 1861, when Virginia seceded from the Union and joined the Confederacy, President Abraham Lincoln asked Lee to lead the Union Army. Lee considered this offer seriously, but ultimately decided to accept an appointment in the Confederate Army instead. This decision was influenced by a number of factors, including his strong ties to Virginia and his belief in states' rights. In fact, Lee had been a strong opponent of secession when it was first proposed and had urged his home state of Virginia to remain in the Union. However, once Virginia had seceded, he felt that he had no choice but to join the Confederacy. After being named general of the Confederate Army, Lee's task was to stop the Union from taking over the South. At first, he succeeded. In fact, the Battle of Bull Run, or Manassas, was a humiliating defeat for the Union forces. It showed the North that winning the war would be far from easy. For some time, Lee's victories kept the South in the fight. Even after losing the Peninsula Campaign, he won important battles at Fredericksburg and Chancellorsville. However, the latter came at a great cost. During the battle, Lee's best friend and most trusted advisor, General Thomas Jackson, was killed. This was a devastating blow to Lee, who relied heavily on Jackson's support, both militarily and emotionally. By 1863, the tide of the war was beginning to turn against the Confederacy. After suffering a series of costly defeats, Lee was ordered to evacuate Charleston, South Carolina, which he did in early 1865. As Union troops closed in, he retreated to Richmond, where he set up his headquarters in the basement of the Virginia State Library. Despite the mounting pressure, Lee continued to fight, hoping for a miracle that never came. On April 9, 1865, he surrendered to General Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse. In the aftermath of the war, Lee was tried for treason by a military tribunal, but was acquitted and released. He then returned to Virginia, where he took on the presidency of Washington College, now known as Washington and Lee University. In this role, Lee worked to rebuild the institution, which had been damaged during the war. He also served as an advisor to President Andrew Johnson during Reconstruction, although it's unclear how much influence Lee actually had. Despite his efforts to move beyond his wartime persona, Lee's legacy remains complicated by his role as the military leader of the Confederacy. He has been both celebrated and vilified for his actions during the Civil War, and his statue has been the focus of numerous protests and controversies in recent years. Lee was born into an era when slavery was legal and accepted throughout the southern United States. Like many other white Southerners, he benefited from the institution of slavery, as it allowed him to maintain his social status and wealth. However, there is little evidence that Lee ever owned slaves himself, and it appears that he may have even opposed the expansion of slavery into new territories. This is because he understood the negative effects that slavery could have on a society. In fact, Lee once wrote to his wife that slavery was a, quote, cruel and unusual punishment. Nevertheless, he still saw it as a necessary evil that should be maintained in order to preserve the Union. In a letter to his friend General Joseph E. Johnston in 1836, he stated that, quote, the institution of slavery is a very grave and a very serious evil. But I think it better to leave as things are than to attempt to right what is wrong by violence. Lee's views on slavery were complex and cannot be easily categorized. While he may have personally found slavery abhorrent, he still saw it as a necessary evil that should be maintained in order to preserve the Union. This contradiction is evident in his decision to join the Confederacy, as he believed that the preservation of states' rights was more important than the abolition of slavery. Lee played a major role in the Battle of Antietam, which was the single bloodiest day in American history with over 22,000 casualties. Following the battle, President Lincoln seized on the high number of Confederate casualties to announce his intention to issue a preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. This declaration would go on to free all enslaved people in Confederate territory. While it did not immediately end slavery, the document had a profound impact on the course of the Civil War. It transformed the conflict into a war about ending slavery and inspired thousands of Black Americans to join the Union Army. In fact, by the end of the war, over 180,000 African Americans had served in the Union Army and Navy, making up about 10% of the total Union force. So, what was Lee's role in all of this? Well, his plan was to invade the North and win a decisive victory that would force the Union to end the war. However, his army was outnumbered and outgunned and suffered a decisive defeat at the Battle of Gettysburg. This was a turning point in the war and ensured that the Union would not negotiate away the emancipation of enslaved people. In fact, Lincoln used the Union victory at Gettysburg to issue the final Emancipation Proclamation on January 1, 1863. So, while Lee did not directly cause the end of slavery, his military failures certainly accelerated its demise. When the news of the Emancipation Proclamation reached Lee's army, he reportedly responded with a shrug and said, "It is a merciful providence that has thrown this war into the hands of men who, if they had the power, would abolish slavery." However, this statement should be viewed in context. Lee was a soldier first and foremost, and his primary goal was to win the war. He understood that ending slavery was a moral imperative, but he also knew that it would be extremely difficult to accomplish. In fact, he once wrote to his wife that he feared that the, quote, hot zeal of some would come to not save in the shedding of blood and the desolating of country. In the end, Lee was unable to find a way to end slavery without bloodshed, and the Civil War resulted in the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Americans. His home was turned into Arlington National Cemetery. So what do you think? How should we remember Robert E. Lee? Let us know in the comments below. And while you're there, be sure to like and subscribe for more historical tales. Thanks for watching.